Hi, everyone.
Hey, Dr. Falls.
Just trying to make sure I let everybody in. Let's see. Think of everybody. Okay. I'll try to keep an eye on it if anyone else shows up. I tend to get distracted and leave people sitting in the waiting area. Okay. So this is really informal. I want to just start with a couple things that I thought would be, I'm sure what that is about. That I wanted to just remind you about in like the process of thinking through your statistical analysis. And then I can answer questions and, help you brainstorm if you need it with respect to your questions. But I want to just remind you that the difference between basic research and applied research. So it's really important to keep in mind what you're doing and why you're doing it. So you want to have, when you do your study, you want to have actionable results. So when you run your statistical analysis, you need to be able to analyze them and interpret them and say how they would be applied by a nutrition professional. Okay, so it's really important to keep that in mind. And so that's the difference between applied research and basic research, whereas basic research is generally the statistics are much more complex and it's more about just gaining knowledge and understanding things more deeply. But oftentimes when you use complex statistical analysis, it's really hard to make that translation to practice. Does that make sense? So I want you to keep that in mind. This was a weird year because never before, like I would say, I mean, all but a few students said that they were going to use regression analysis considering covariance. So which is totally fine if you can explain how to do that and do it and explain how you would translate the results into your practice. It's generally not how I would do research, applied research, because again, it's just complex. And when you add all those covariants in the statistical analysis, it's very hard to just say, okay, here's what we would do with those studies. Does that make sense? Um, okay, so let me just trying to figure out how I can show you stuff and still see you, so I know if you guys are. So please, if something I say something and it doesn't make sense or it's confusing or you need me to re-say it in another way, please just like speak up, shout out, because it's super important that you get this stuff because these are the courses where you are demonstrating your competencies. And so I would strongly encourage you to use less complex statistics so that you can ensure that you fully understand it and you can demonstrate your competencies. And it's really clear when a student is just reading a script in a presentation and when they are explaining something and they really understand it. Okay. So I don't know, like, I mean, is there anybody who is planning to do regression analysis with covariance that wants to explain why they chose that approach? I've never had that before. So it's just, I just thought it was so weird that this year, like so many students chose that. And anybody? Nobody?
Yeah, I was actually kind of debating between using MANOVA and linear regression, and I was really going back and forth until the last minute and ended up choosing linear regression because I had two outcomes that I was looking at, two measurable outcomes that I was looking at, and I thought maybe it would make the most sense to see separately what the relationship is between um, or like to look at them separately, the two measurable outcomes separately, my dependent variables.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know that you had commented on that as well to maybe consider rethinking that. And so
Yeah.
that's why I also wanted to come to this just to
Yeah.
see like what would be most appropriate and if my line of thinking is in line with what I was kind of imagining, or if like a MANOVA test would
I
make more
think
sense.
honestly, thank you, Hannah, for that.
Yeah.
I think that Manova might even be too complex. So like
Oh,
if you
okay.
have two, so this is what I'm just going to tell you what I would encourage you to do. Again, if
Okay.
you want to take a bigger bite than I would ask you to take, more than's required, I would absolutely not tell you not to, because it's you're working independently, and if you want to like, really decide you want to dig into some of the statistics, that's totally fine. But for me, if you can demonstrate these, sorry, can you guys see this? Am I blocking you with your face? You can see this? Okay. So I gave you this in week 1, and I think it's shown up a couple places in between the two classes. Is this familiar to everybody?
Yes.
So honestly, I would encourage you to really understand these statistical tests. So these are the statistical tests, you guys. I mean, you've seen them on week 1 on the statistical worksheet. You've saw it in week 4 when you were practicing your stata. So for you guys who are not going to be basic science researchers, you are trying to look simply at things that are complex, recognizing that you're never going to have absolute answers. You're just trying to understand, trying to get a better handle on how to apply or what's the best thing to do in a nutrition practice. So I would encourage you to think through, like make a list of your, for both descriptive statistical analysis and inferential analysis. Just like write down, like, so in your case, Hannah, if you have 1 independent variable and 2 dependent variables. So I would look at those each separately. Like, what do you want to know? Is this related to this? Or is there a difference in the mean of this among these groups? So put it in your own words and then figure out what would be the best way to do that. So remind me, Hannah, what your independent variable is.
Yes, so my independent variable is SNAP participation, and then I have 2 nutrient dependent variables, so 2 different nutrients.
Okay, and it's intake, or is it? I mean, it doesn't really, it's intake.
Yeah, they're going to be measured in grams. So I
Okay,
was going to do the mean of the 2 dietary recalls for both nutrients.
right. So they're not really related to each other, right? You want to know.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if there's not a reason you have to throw everything into one statistical test, then you absolutely shouldn't. So really,
Okay.
so when you back out of it, you would essentially say you have 1 categorical variable, which is your independent variable, and then
Yes.
you're looking at the first one, you have a continuous variable. And how many groups do you have?
I guess I would have 2 groups.
Okay,
Yep.
so then you would
Yep.
use a t-test. And so
Yep.
you would do 2
Okay.
t-tests.
Okay. That makes sense.
And doesn't that simple? And I mean, now can you feel
Yes.
like you could complete, and then you would say, like, from my analysis, I clearly see that those who participate in or take advantage of SNAP benefits consume higher concentration or higher amounts of this nutrient and this nutrient, or this nutrient but not this nutrient, or neither nutrients. Either one, it's really clear, and you can talk about it as actionable. Okay,
Okay. Yes, that
so
makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
okay, good. Okay, yeah. So when you look at everything together, it's, and so that's your inferential statistics. So then similarly, when you're talking about, so the other thing is lots of students had covariance as like a heading in their methods. So I don't think you've ever heard me talk about covariance, because I talk about descriptive variables. So they're very similar, but I talk about descriptive variables because descriptive variables are analyzed a little differently. When you use the term covariance, then that means that it's something that you have to consider when you're doing your inferential analysis, which is where probably what led you guys to this more complex regression analysis. But I didn't put it on here. I haven't put it on any of your assignments because, again, this isn't, you guys aren't statisticians. And in all honesty, if you ever do a study that needs that level of statistical analysis, you'll have a statistician on your team most likely. I mean, there's a lot of cool things you can do with statistics, but I mean, sometimes I play around with it, but for an actual study, it would have to, there'd be a statistician doing it. So for your descriptive variables, so you always talk about descriptive first, then inferential. So I know I've said this to all of you at least once, and I talked about it in the kickoff meeting and showed you a different table, but any research that includes human subjects has the first table in the results is going to look like something like this. So this is what I'm talking about with your descriptive variables. So there's usually, it's the relevant demographic variables and then any potential confounding variables. So then what you do is usually it's represented overall and then per group, and then you do your analysis and compare your groups. Okay, so that's your descriptive statistical analysis, but each one of these is analyzed separately. So you do a statistic test for each one of your descriptive variables. So the age, obviously they use the t-test because that's continuous. Male or, oh, this is a, so I'm trying to see, like, so like education, whether they were male, I don't know what all these variables are, but some of them are categorical and some of them are continuous. So since there's only two groups, any of the continuous one, obviously they use the t-test. Any of the ones that categorical, you can see that the numbers are all above 5, so they use the chi-square. Well, maybe not for this one. But okay, does that make sense to you? So each individual test is run differently. And so the way that in applied research, if you read through these papers, you'll see that the descriptive variables are meant to inform your interpretation of the inferential analysis. So again, Hannah, because you're the first one we talked about. So say you don't find a difference between your groups. So then you would say, it appears that's not that there was not a difference between those who SNAP, but it's important to look at our groups. And as you can see, this group was the group that used SNAP were, whatever, like they're mostly women, they tend to be older, so you use this to inform how you interpret your actual analysis of your your inferential variables. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just to I guess see if I have this down correctly, then I would take my group, so like SNAP participation or non-SNAP participation, and then put in another descriptive variable and then see, like, for example, put it through a t-test, for example, if it's like age, and then
Right.
see what the results show.
Right. Is there a statistically significant difference in the age of group 1 compared to the age
The
of
age
group
of
2?
group 2. Okay, gotcha.
So you're comparing all of your descriptive variables, you're comparing between your groups. So that's what all these tables and all these papers you read, this table, that's what this table is. It's the descriptive characteristics of your population. So they had two groups in this case, the study, they had rural and urban, and they had almost equal numbers. And so this is the mean and standard deviation of one versus the other. The frequency of males in this one versus the other. So yes, so that's what descriptive statistics are. So again, unless you have a clear reason where you think you need to consider one of these covariants in your inferential analysis, I would encourage you not to. And honestly, so I can tell you there's tons of NHANES papers that do really complex statistical analysis. However, those are not applied research. And there's a group mostly from Asian countries. I mean, if you look at the authors and their affiliations, And I just think that they just sit there all day long and play with NHANES data and do all kinds of stuff with NHANES data, which is great. I mean, it's good information. I would argue that sometimes it's overinterpretation of data, because when you have so many potential variables in the collection of data, you shouldn't really do such complex statistical analysis, because there's so many places that it may not be absolutely precise. So this is my opinion, everybody has their own opinion. It's why I'm not an academic, but I've been why I like applied research, because I feel like you can make your data say anything you want sometimes. And so, I mean, I've literally been to meetings where a person stands up and does this really compelling argument showing these complex statistical analysis, and then the next person comes up and does a completely opposite argument with the same data. So I feel like unless there's a reason not to, you should do the simplest thing you can do to give yourself the answer you're looking for. So in your case, you guys are just want to be able to say, if you're a nutrition professional and you run into this problem, here's what my study showed you could do. This Mediterranean diet tends to be more effective in lowering binge eating disorders, or whatever it is. I was reading a 755 proposal earlier, and that just came to my mind. But does that make sense? Okay, so let me see what else I had that I wanted to talk to you about. And then, so again, I would say use this. This is really, I mean, there's tons of flowcharts in that you can find, but I just created this one because I just feel like if you get this and you can talk about this competently and confidently, I will feel like I have done my job. And so I would tell you, I mean, again, it's your study, you can do whatever you want, but I would encourage you to stay within this realm. So I think that was it. So if anyone wants to jump in, and I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other. Does anyone want to discuss their study and ask questions? Or do you want to work on? Okay, Hallie, go ahead.
Okay, so for my study, I'm looking at protein intake, and I did like a specific amount greater than 1.2 grams per kilogram. And that's correlated with lean mass from the DEXA data. So would I divide the groups into greater 1.2 grams per kilogram and more, and then less than 1.2?
So I'm a little confused. Is that protein intake your population or your independent variable?
No, that's my independent variable. So my population is women ages 30 to 35.
Yeah, so I would probably, so what's commonly done when you're doing something like that, you have this whole range of so it's protein intake. So really your study is their association with protein intake and lean body mass in this population, right?
Yes.
So normally what was often done when you're doing something like that with dietary intake is that it's you take your range of values and you make 4 groups, which would be like quartiles.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Have you seen that before? Like quartile, it's really easy to do it in Excel.
Okay.
You just you can Google how to calculate quartiles, but essentially it'll say group 1 will have a protein intake between this level and this level. And what that is 25% of your population has that range of protein intake. Then quartile 2 would have, again, the second range, quartile 3, and then quartile 4 would have the highest. So now you've created a categorical variable with your data. And then your outcome data, is it categorical or continuous? The DEXA, what's that? Do you know how that reports?
I think it's it's percent in percentages.
Okay, so that might be continuous.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have, going back to my share thing, if you have a one categorical variable, which now you do, your protein would
Mhm.
be in categorical, and then your continuous, and these, your dependent would be continuous, and you have 3 or more groups, now you'll do an ANOVA.
Okay.
And so, and remember, if you run an ANOVA, you run an ANOVA, and then if you have a p-value less than 0.05, that means there's statistical significance. That means that among your 4 means, something, at least 2 of them are different than each other, statistically significantly different. And so then you would have to run a post hoc test, and that will tell you which ones are different than each other.
Okay. Could I potentially, I mean, I'm not opposed to doing it in the quartiles and doing an ANOVA, but could I do it as 2 groups, like less than 1.2 grams per kilogram per day and more than 1.2
You
grams?
could definitely, like, you would have to have a reason though. Like what is magical at 1.2?
I selected that just because it's like higher than the recommended intake. So I was trying to do like protein intake above the RDA.
So I
Um,
mean, I would, if you do groups that aren't quartiles, you can absolutely do that. You
Okay.
can't, you just have to have a reason for what you do. So
Okay.
I would tell you that I wouldn't think that was a great study. I would tell you to
Okay.
at least have 3 groups, like
Okay.
below the RDA, meet the RDA, like whatever, what is the RDA now? 0.9? Do you know?
Yeah, I think it's like 0.8 to 0.1, 0.8 to 1.
Okay, so that would be a group, and then above the RDA
Okay.
or something like that. So you'd have 3 groups.
Okay.
But
Okay.
because I think that's more informative, because so one of the things that I always try to do is think about the questions that someone would have for me. And
Okay.
so like if you did above and below 1.2 and you found that there was no difference, I'd be like, okay, but is the RDA high enough? Or, like it would just leave too much room for questions.
Okay.
So you can do that. And sometimes it's better to do that. If there's something like an RDA or some kind of guideline, it's better to make your groups based on that. It's fine.
Okay.
But oftentimes quartiles are used. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then if you have 3 groups, then when you think about your descriptive statistics, you got to think about you're comparing all those 3 groups for everything else that you're analyzing. But each variable would be a different test. Not
Okay.
necessarily a different test, but you'd run a different test.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So a lot of times, like, I mean, we don't have everybody that have to go if like something I'm saying to somebody else fits what you're doing, but who else has like needs some clarity? Anybody?
Can I?
Okay.
Can I
Yeah.
go?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm looking at awareness of the MyPlate plan and willingness to try the plan among Asian Americans.
Mhm.
So originally I was thinking they're both categorical variables. So I was
Mhm.
thinking the chi-squared test, chi-squared.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, those are probably just like yes, no answers, right? So it'll be a 2 by 2.
And so one of your comments to me was that you recommended more descriptive variables.
Mhm.
So basically I would see if there's a statistical significance between the 2 and then apply that to like age or income, something like
Yeah,
that.
whatever you think is like relevant to your study.
Okay.
So that's the descriptive variables, and then any potential confounding variables. So income would be obviously, I mean, could be a confounding variable. So yeah. So I'm not necessarily, I mean, you don't have to have 10 or 15, but you have to have enough again that demonstrates to me you understand what they are and what the role of them is.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else?
I have a question on
can
the
I go?
table.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let's do the question first. Was that you, Laura?
I didn't have I
Oh,
just wanted to
yeah,
talk
but you
about
had a
my study,
question.
so you can do the
Okay.
question first.
Yeah, I
You
had a
wanna-
question on the table. So can Stata create this table, or because I was playing around with it and I couldn't get the p-values for all the
No,
different.
Stata is,
Okay.
I would do your tables in Excel.
Okay.
It's really hard to
Thank
get
you.
professional. I mean, I think I haven't put a ton of time into it because I always do them in Excel. So it's easy to do Excel tables.
What about for the graph? Should the graph be from Stata?
I know, like, unless you I mean, some people can make pretty graphs in Stata, but I'm just old, right? So I've used Excel for so long that it's really easy, I think, to use Excel to make graphs
Yeah.
and tables. And so I am always the person that's going to do the easiest thing to get me what I want to do. I mean, if it wasn't as good, I would, but I think that Excel does a great job. So,
Okay, I'm totally happy using Excel. Thank you.
okay. All right, Laura.
Okay, so mine is on fiber and sleep study or sleep quality. And I have sleep disturbance, sleep in hours, like how long they sleep per night, and then if they have a diagnosed sleep disorder. So 2 of those are binary because they're yes, no.
Mhm.
And the sleep in hours, I suppose I could make categorical.
You don't have to, because just similar to what we were just saying with Hannah, you'd analyze each of those
Yeah.
separately.
Each of separately. Okay.
Mhm.
So it'd be different tests for each one. So I just pick the test for like if I'm
Correct.
doing
Correct.
chi
So if it's
square
a
or
dependent
whatever it
variable,
is.
if you only have 2 groups and your dependent variable is continuous, like hours of sleep, then you would just do a t-test. And then if it's categorical, which the other 2 are, then you would just do a chi-square probably.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. Yep.
That was
I
that
mean,
was my question. Just to make
again,
sure.
like thinking about that, like I mean, if you had to if you analyze them all together, then you'd be like, okay, like if say you're talking to a colleague who you want to give this information. If you have a client that is this and this and this, then you would do this, but only if this happened, like it's too complex. So you could just say, like fiber tends to be associated, or in my study, fiber was associated with this categorical variable. It wasn't. However, when I looked at our sleep, it had those who ate more fiber did sleep more than or have higher number of hours. So thinking about how you talk about it is really helpful. Okay.
Yep,
Right.
that actually makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, anybody else? I can't see everybody still. I'm gonna stop my share. Okay. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
So for mine, I'm doing it on phosphorus intake and coronary artery disease.
Which
And I have
intake? Phosphorus?
Yes.
Okay,
And I have 2 different days, so I'm assuming I just average them together.
correct.
I don't have to
Yeah.
do 2 different groups or anything, just average them.
No, you could usually I mean, you always want to have the most valid data you can have. And since you have intake for 2 days, anybody who's doing an intake, you should create a new variable, which would be the mean of the 2 days. And that
Okay.
would be become your variable.
Okay.
Is that it?
Oh yeah, that's it.
Oh, that was easy.
It
Okay.
was easy, right? Nothing too
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Sure,
Okay.
I'll go. I just
Oh,
want to make sure I'm on
okay. Go
the
ahead.
right page. So for mine was vitamin D levels, association with constipation rates, which would be measured by like always, sometimes, never,
Mhm.
so different variables or different measures. So would that be the ANOVA? That's what I had.
Well, it is. Yeah. So
Just comparing different.
Yeah. So you're in so you have one categorical variable and one continuous variable.
Yes.
But yours is a little twisty because your independent variable is the continuous, right? So normally your independent variable is the one that's categorical, which is fine to do it that way. Just make sure you don't get confused when you're talking about it, that you're
Okay.
still saying, or you could take your vitamin D intake and put that into categories like I was talking earlier with Hallie. Who was that? You, Hallie? Yeah.
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 So it could be the same thing. It could be like below RDA, above RDA, or something like that. Or you could do the
Okay.
quartiles.
It's like
however
the
you want.
lab value of like what their vitamin D level is.
Oh, it's the vitamin D. I got confused now. What's your independent variable?
The independent variable is the laboratory data of using like vitamin D of what
Okay, what's your dependent variable?
is using the questionnaire bowel health, which is
Okay.
categorical
Okay.
because it's
Got it.
like I said, it
Okay.
kind of asks how often that
Yeah,
they
yeah,
deal with
yeah.
constipation.
Okay. Got it. Then, yeah, vitamin D, I think I've been giving some of you guys feedback because you're using old references for assessing vitamin D. It's really messy right now. So for a long time, everybody was basing vitamin D on less than 20, is it micrograms per, I don't know what the units are, but that has been, there was a big update in 2024 because serum vitamin D is really complex. It's changes all the time, and it's hard to assess. And so most people think that 20 is high, and so a lot of people were diagnosed as vitamin D deficient. There was one like well-known study that people talk a lot about that was done in Hawaii among surfers, and they all had vitamin D deficiency. And so, like, I mean, I've been saying for decades, if that's the case, then we're using the wrong values. Like, it just can't be true.
Sure.
So I would say for you, I would do the quartiles because that takes it out of the I'm actually, are you coming to a meeting tomorrow with me?
Yes.
Okay, I can help you do that. I can show you how to do that. But I would
Okay.
make that into quartiles, and then you'd have 4 groups, and then you would have 2 categorical variables.
You're saying like change the vitamin D into like ranges of like where
Mhm.
their level like
Mhm.
falls.
So
Okay.
there'd be in like basically 4 groups.
4 groups between the two.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you would just look at them as 2 categorical variables.
2 categorical. Okay. And then
Okay.
doing the descriptive would be comparing it between the 4 groups.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, that's
Yep.
helpful. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions?
I kind of have a question about like using Stata and Excel. Are there any resources you recommend for doing it in Excel? Like as opposed, you were just talking about the descriptive variables table, like doing that in Excel. Is that running the test in Excel or just having the table
No,
in
creating
Excel?
your tables in Excel.
Okay.
So I mean, I have found that it's easiest to clean, merge, and then get my data set put together by putting everything from Stata to Excel. But then it goes back into Stata to run your statistical analysis.
Okay.
But I'm talking about when you're creating like publication ready. So I'm going to say this to all of you and anybody else who listens to this presentation. And because I put it in my announcement, but I would say half the students still do it. The output of Stata is not a publication ready table or figure. So, you just get that thing that you include, like it was appropriate to put it in your week 4 assignment, like what came out of Stata. But that's not what you would put in a publication. So you need to take that data, make your tables, make your figures, whatever it has to be. You have to make sure it has all the axes are labeled. You have a legend, you indicate your statistical significance, just like every paper you've ever read you've seen hundreds of, if not thousands of tables and figures. So that's what you're trying to create, something that looks like those. So that's what I'm saying. It's easy to do that in Excel. And again, I could go to YouTube and search how to make a table in Excel, but I would just send you, I might look at 2 or 3 and send you one I like, but there's so much available now.
Okay.
You guys just have it made compared to when I was in graduate school. So, okay. Anything else? Okay. Was this helpful? So definitely remember, just keep in mind, I know how busy you guys are, but you are demonstrating your competency. So don't put something down that you don't understand or, isn't, if I've never talked about it ever, then you probably aren't expected to understand it. So don't make it harder for yourself than you have to. Okay. All right. Have a good night.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.